Hey everyone, it's Caitlin and welcome back to another video. If you're new here, I make simple and delicious vegan recipes. So if you like what you see, make sure you hit that subscribe button and check out the full recipe, which is always on my blog and linked in the description box. Today we are making the coziest, most delicious, tastiest, heartiest vegan shepherd's pie you ever did see. I'm gonna break it down for you. We're gonna talk about some fun facts, have fun in the kitchen, you know, all that good stuff. So let's get into it. I personally think it's always fun to know where recipes come from, so we'll do a brief little mini history. Shepherd's pie was actually originally known as cottage pie. I gotta check my notes for that. Cottage pie dates back to 1791, but shepherd's pie came around in 1854. But either way, it's essentially the same. It's minced meat topped with a mashed potato crust on its most basic form. Actually, the original versions used to have mashed potatoes on the bottom and the sides and the top, but now today we kind of nix that stuff and just stick with the top. In the UK, it's usually made with lamb, but in the US, it's more commonly made with beef. Obviously, we like cows and sheep, so we're not going to be using either of those in this video, and we're going to be making it totally plant-based and vegan and gluten-free too. Basically, the original recipe was seen as an economical or budget-friendly way to use up leftover meat. I still think all the ingredients of this recipe are very hearty and budget-friendly and still filling and delicious. So if your mouth's not drooling yet, I'm about to make it drool, I hope. So let's get into cooking. The first thing we're going to do is preheat our oven to 400 degrees and set a 9x13 casserole dish aside. Now let's talk about our potatoes. Obviously, we need a nice classic mashed potato topping for our casserole. So for this recipe, we're going to be using russet potatoes. Traditionally, if you're making mashed potatoes, you'd either want to use russet and gold or gold. They tend to be a little creamier, where this is starchier and drier. However, we're going to be making this creamy with some plant-based fats, and the starchiness of the russet potatoes make a perfect crust for our shepherd's pie. So stick with russet for this recipe. So basically, we are going to peel our russet potatoes, cut them into relatively small chunks. You don't have to get too crazy here. Then put them in a pan with the water and bring this to a boil. Boil for 10 to 15 minutes until they're fork tender. Pro tip number one, the reason why we're adding our water with the potatoes is that when you bring the potatoes to boil with the water, it actually cuts back on the starchiness some, so the final mashed potatoes aren't super dry, even though we're using russets. So like I mentioned earlier, shepherd's pie is traditionally made with ground lamb or mutton or ground beef here in the United States. Obviously, we're making it plant-based, and the easiest solution for a minced meat is to use lentils. However, I like to use French lentils, not the traditional brown lentils that you see at the grocery store. Here are both of them side by side. As you can see, the French lentils are a little smaller and darker, and the size difference is great for the mincing. But also, the texture is really, really important too. So French lentils here stay firm when you cook them. They take a little bit longer on the stovetop, but I find that the end texture result is totally worth it. That being said, they are harder to find. You can find them online and in some specialty grocery stores though, but most stores are just gonna have these brown lentils, which are okay. You could cook them a little less so they're slightly more firm, but overall the texture gets a little bit more mushy, and typically meat has more of a chewy texture to it, which is why I like to use the French, but these brown lentils will work in a pinch, and they are more budget friendly too. So for this recipe, you want to have your lentils cooked ahead of time, or in the off chance you can find canned lentils in your grocery store, you can go ahead and use those too. But now let's talk about our other flavor things. So obviously lentils are a good source of protein, but they're not necessarily the best source of flavor. So we're using 4 other ingredients to really amp up that meaty, hearty umami flavor in this recipe. First, we have tomato paste, which adds a great umami flavor. And then again with the umami, we have mushrooms, but they also add a hearty, meaty bite. Next up, we have vegan Worcestershire sauce, which is optional, but I recommend it. It just adds a great depth of flavor and level of spiciness that you can't get if you leave it out. And then last but certainly not least, some vegan imitation beef broth for a hearty beef-ish flavor. So our potatoes have been boiling, so I should probably stop talking and get to cooking. So let's get into actually making the filling portion of this recipe. So before we make the filling, let's actually just finish up mashing our potatoes. We're going with a pretty classic recipe here. Just add your potatoes to the pot, and then to make it nice and creamy, we'll use some vegan dairy-free butter, obviously it's vegan, and some plant-based milk. I also like to add a bit of nutritional yeast to enhance the more dairy flavor, and then we'll season our potatoes up with some garlic powder, some salt, and some black pepper to taste. Personally, I like to use a potato masher with my mashed potatoes and mash them until they are nice and pretty creamy, I guess. It's a good way to get out, you know, your stress and aggression from the day. So after the potatoes are looking thin enough and mashed enough and they're no big chunks, you can switch from the potato masher over to a spatula and then just stir everything until it's well combined. And it's amazing how it all started with chunks, and with some pure grit, you turned it into potatoes or something like that. Okay, now let's actually move on to the filling. First, we're going to warm some olive oil over medium heat in a skillet and saute some onion until it's kind of translucent. We're going to build a lot of base flavor here. And what I like to do is actually add in my tomato paste to the onion early. So frying the tomato paste ahead of time is infusing it into the oil, and it's also bringing out more depth of flavor in the tomato paste. So it's already a great umami bomb, but this way it adds even more flavor to our final dish, making it all that more delicious. Next up, we're going to add in our mushrooms and our herbs. I'm using parsley, thyme, rosemary, salt, and pepper here. I personally prefer to use fresh herbs because they have a lot more flavor than dried herbs. So if you can get your hands on them, I really recommend it. But if not, you can use dried herbs. I have the substitutions for that listed in the notes of the recipe, which is linked in the comments of this video. So we'll saute that until the mushrooms are cooked down, then go in with our vegan garlic and Worcestershire sauce, plus some flour, which is sort of going to be the base of our gravy or sauce that's going to capture all the flavors for our filling. You can use regular flour or gluten-free flour for this recipe. It doesn't matter. After that's cooked out a little bit, we're going to add in our final ingredients, which are our lentils, our vegetables, and our beef imitation broth, and just bring this to a simmer and stir it until the frozen vegetables have thawed. You can use fresh veggies if you want, but it's just easier to find a frozen veggie blend, so you do whatever works best for you. But this is what the filling should look like once it's nice and done. So you can pull this off of the heat, and now we'll get to layering our casserole. Start by pouring all of that filling into the bottom, and then you can use a spatula to just make sure it's spread out, evenly mixed, and in a nice even layer. I went a little rogue and used a wooden spoon, but I guess either will work here. So next up, we're going to add the potatoes. The key to this is that you do want to add a little bit more milk to this recipe, which cooks out in the oven, so the potatoes become nice and spreadable. But first, we are going to start by dolloping them onto the pan, and then start by spreading them out into a relatively even layer. Now, a key note here, we're not just going to be putting our mashed potatoes on and making a nice smooth top. One of the great things about shepherd's pie is that you get a crisp crust, and the best way to achieve optimum browning and texture with your potatoes is to use a fork. Just rough them up a little bit. Now you can do whatever method you want. You can do a cross hatch, you can make a shape or make some sort of interpretive abstract art. Personally, I just like to go with a basic wavy shape. Either way, you're getting peaks and ridges, and the peaks are going to brown and get nice and crispy once we bake it in the oven. But before we put this in the oven, you're going to use that remaining tablespoon of butter that you're going to melt, brush this on top, and this is going to help with the browning even more. It's optional, but if you really want that crisp crust, I highly recommend it. So let's pop this in the oven, and this is what it looks like when it comes out. It's hearty, it's creamy, tender. You got a nice thick layer of brown mashed potatoes on top, and some veggies and lentils in the most delicious gravy on the bottom. You want to let the casserole cool for about 15 minutes before serving, but once it's cooled, you can go ahead, serve it up, dig in, and enjoy. So we've got homemade vegan shepherd's pie with a textured lentil mushroom filling with crispy golden mashed potatoes on top with some salt bay parsley.
Cozy, wholesome feeling, tasty, nutritious, and I'm gonna eat the whole thing.
We got a nice thick layer of potatoes. You can't, the mic's not gonna pick it up, but we got a nice, get a nice crispy coating on the potatoes. I know some people who follow me try to do oil-free or limit the oil in their recipes, but I think that it's necessary in this recipe for the creamy potatoes, definitely the crispy top. And then also, you could leave it out in the filling if you want, but like beefin is normally like creamier or heartier, I guess, because it has like natural fat. So the oil just makes it like juicier, you know? But I'm really happy with how the flavors came out. Really happy with the texture. I definitely like these lentils over like the mushy lentils. I feel like it makes it more fun to eat because you already have the mushy mashed potatoes on top.
On point.
How would you rate it out of 10?
10 out of 10 for real. This one is, you should make it.
Oh, thanks.
She's gonna end the video, then I'm gonna come back and eat that whole thing.
All right.
Peace.
So that concludes this recipe. As always, be sure to check out the full post on my blog. It'll be linked down below. I have tips and tricks, process steps, measurements in American or United States measurements, and also in grams. So I've got everything for you over there, including some acceptable substitutions. So I hope you guys like this recipe. Let me know if you have any future recipe requests. I just love vegan comfort food. It's obviously one of my favorite things to make, and I feel like I do a pretty good dang job at this. If you make this recipe, what I would love from you is to leave a comment below, but also to leave a star rating and review on my blog. That really helps more people see the recipe, and then more people can just eat delicious, yummy vegan food. My camera battery is flashing red, and I also think my memory card is about to fill up. So I'm gonna wrap this up and end the video here. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to virtually see you soon. Bye.